Well, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here today with Stacey Madden from Somatic for Mindful Somatic Wellness. And I met Stacey when I went to look at her beautiful space here in Calgary and wanting to look at um, renting her space for a meditation workshop. And Stacy and I got into the most amazing conversation that I thought, okay, we're meant to really share this conversation. And what I loved about the conversation with Stacy, and that we're going to continue on today, is about how we talked about how we kind of connect the dots between the stress that we experience, some of the traumas that we might have experienced in our life, how that relates to our nervous system and our body, and also where anxiety and depression fits into that whole experience. So I loved her um, understanding around that, her views about that, and I'm so excited to have her share it with us today. So I'm going to just ask you, Stacey, just to tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about what you do, why you do it, and some of what has brought you to this amazing work that you're doing.
Oh, thanks, Bev. I really appreciate that. I'm excited to talk about all of this today, too. I guess if I sort of drop in to my own body and kind of check into, really what has led me here to this place, it's really a lot of lived experience. I think, like,
Mm.
from probably many people who are watching or follow what you do, or potentially even you yourself, I think we find ourselves sometimes in these positions because we've lived through a lot. Yeah, and then when we can kind of come out the other side and gain some clarity and understanding and, irregulation, which we'll probably talk about later, it feels like it's sometimes a safe place to offer from. So my background, or sort of how I offer things currently in this space of, that we got to look at and that you'll be offering through too, is through the language of the body, through somatics. And a long time ago, it was with yoga. That was my entry doorway back into my body in a safe and alive kind of way. And I think that's really common for a lot of people, particularly women. I think
Mhm.
that yoga has been a major gateway for a lot of us to begin to feel embodied and safe again without
Mhm.
a lot of social pressure about, like, cardiovascular heart rate and losing
Mhm.
weight and all of those other sort of social pressures. So a very long time ago, my pathway into somatics definitely was through yoga,
Mhm.
particularly breath work, which I did for a long time. But where I find myself today is as a somatic movement educator and therapist.
Mhm.
And that's really through the pathway and portal of the nervous system as it lies and informs in our body, informs us about whether we're safe or not, and informs us of our relationships with ourselves and others. So there's a lot of science and evidence-based process that goes along with somatics, which I really, really enjoy and like to have because it provides a really steady framework. And then there's a lot of other things that are sort of hard to be measured, like people's emotional responses and how our past histories sort of affect how we feel in ourselves and how we show up today. I hope
That
that
is
kind of
beautiful.
describes.
Yeah, I love how you've woven all those pieces together in a way that really creates an environment for healing. And I think one of the things when I first walked into your beautiful space was I noticed your sign, and your sign was about inviting people to check in with their nervous system. And I would just love for you to share with us, what are we talking about when we talk about the nervous system? And why is that so foundational for healing, or whatever the type of healing and growth that we're called to do, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual? So, what is the nervous system, and how does that relate to creating a foundation for healing?
Yeah, fantastic question. That is such a good question because I'm hearing the word nervous system more and more, which is great. Like, a lot of the terms and practices that I use, like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, collapse, shutdown response, is becoming part of the common vernacular now, which is great because it kind of paves the way for what I do with a lot less work these days. However, we're still really sort of locked into a cognitive comprehension of what a nervous system is. We think about it. Maybe we've seen pictures outside of ourselves, maybe anatomy or biology photos, or we've seen some polyvagal pictures. That's a really big thing that's picked up energy lately too. But fundamentally, what our nervous system is it's our brain all over our body. So we are
Mm.
nerve rich and nerve dense beings. We have nerve pathways that are microscopic, and we have nerve pathways that we can visually see. We have nerve pathways that are about as big as our thumb, and it's everywhere in our body. And it's this bilateral communication superhighway between our brain, this organ in our head, which we've sort of confused with ourselves in a lot of ways and who we think we
Mm-hmm.
are, and what
Mm-hmm.
our body's actually feeling, doing, sensing, and working towards. So these nerve pathways aren't just afferent, but they're also efferent, which means that they're not only sending information from the brain down into the body, but they're picking up information from inside of our body and outside of our body. In polyvagal, it's called neuroception, and then sending these hundreds, if not thousands, of pathways of data back up into our brain to make some really, really rapid unconscious decisions about, am I going to sit down and feel safe and digest my food and be connected to another person? Or am I going to start to shut down, maybe go into a freeze response? Or am I maybe going to run away and try to get out and have an elevated heart rate? And the majority of these functions are happening unconsciously and rapidly all the time.
I love what you said. I wrote it down. The brain is all over our body. So that is such a powerful thing to say it like that, that we have this intelligence not only in our brain, but in our body. And I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say it like that. I love it. Um, so with this nervous system that you shared about this sense of safety, this sense of creating this foundation to both feel safe in our body and even create space to connect with other people. I love how you extend that to beyond kind of our own nervous system. But tell us a bit more about how stress and trauma, how does that whole thing? So we often, where I'm going with this is we often hear out there about all of these things are talked about, and I am so grateful they are, but often in isolation. So we hear, okay, we're talking about the nervous system. Okay, we're talking about mental health. Okay, we're talking about stress. Okay, we're talking about trauma. Okay, we're talking about chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
But I see, and I know that, our worldviews around this are so aligned. Those things are all related. So when we're pulling them, so really my intention is really to help us connect these dots. So you've talked about the nervous system, you've talked about that's the brain, the intelligence all over our whole body, from our actual brain to what's going on in our body. And the nervous system being about our fight, flight, freeze. But tell us, where does stress fit into that? Where does trauma fit into that? And what is the difference? What's the difference between stress and trauma? We hear these things all the time.
Yeah.
So if you could just shed a light
Yep.
and connect some of those dots, I think that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, you bet. Like, all trauma is a type of toxic stress, be that
Okay.
emotional, social, physiological. It's all stress, but not all stress is trauma.
Okay,
So
just say that again. So
all trauma is a type of
is
stress,
all trauma is a type of stress, but
distress.
not all stress is trauma.
You got it.
Okay. Now say more about that and
Sure.
why it's helpful for people to know and know the difference and what that means and how that relates to the nervous system.
So let's start with stress, or this idea of stress. The moment we are born, we're under a type of stress. The moment we are born, we're now in relationship with gravity. Our lungs now have to take in oxygen. That's a type of stress. The pull of the planet starts to create stress in our joints and our musculature. It's why we build hard muscles. That's why we build hard bones. It's what helps us actually stand up, is this tension point between gravity and our physiology. So stress is just a part of our lives: physiological stress, emotional stress. But there's different kinds of stress. So to break it up, so that we're not here all day or anything. I'll talk about two different
Mhm.
types of stress: eustress and distress on the spectrum of stress. Eustress is a type of stress that helps us overcome something in order to feel strong and empowered. So there's a victorious sort of feeling to it. It's like running a race and getting to the end of it, whether you win or not, and being full of energy, but also having worked your body to a degree that you're sweating. Maybe your feet hurt, but you can get over that because you now feel like you're bigger, better, and stronger for having lived through something or completed something. That's eustress. It's helpful. Now there's distress. Distress is when we are overwhelmed with some sort of ask of energy or output beyond our capacity for an elongated period of time into our bodies, our nervous systems, our minds, our hearts, and our emotions. That's distress. Distress has a different chemical compound, even in our perspiration or our sweat. It smells different. Distress is an ongoing type of pressure into our nervous systems, into our minds, into our family lives, into our wallets that feels like it's unrelenting.
Mhm.
Distress breaks down our resilience. It breaks down our resolve. It breaks down our body's ability to feel coherent in our cardiovascular system and our digestive system. There is a lack of victory in distress. It's ongoing. Eustress tends to be a burst. We complete something and then we rest at the end of it. So there's the difference when we're starting to talk about stress. Stress in and of itself is a state that we all live in from the moment we're born. And for some people, prior to birth, which might lead into more like trauma distress states.
Mhm.
Eustress is quick bursts of adrenaline, helpful cortisol. We feel victorious at the end of it. Ongoing, unrelenting pressure into our bodies, our systems, our lives, and our families create distress. An overload of stress is toxic, and that's when it can contribute and or become trauma. So now that we're talking about trauma, and I love too that trauma is just this buzzword now in society. Like everybody's talking about it, it's everywhere you go. Everybody has trauma,
Yes,
which is
that's
why it's
true.
good to break up stress and trauma for folks too, right?
Yeah.
But when we're talking about trauma in 2025, we're talking about physiology. We're not simply landing in what people think about trauma. When we're looking at trauma in 2025, we're looking at how a body and a nervous system has been asked to move into an adaptive survival state for an elongated period of time, or abruptly, like a shock trauma, or over and over and over again, like a really hard childhood for people. That puts now a body into a distress state as a default baseline and is shows up in things like mental health disorders, emotional dysregulation, and embodied disorders such as, I mean, it can be virtually anything: eczema, heart issue, gut issue, especially. So when we're talking about trauma in 2025, especially in the world of somatics, we're talking about, and we start pretty simplistically, but it really is quite simplistic in a lot of ways. Am I safe? And if I'm not safe, am I going to run away? And if I can't run away, am I going to get my dukes up and fight my way out of this? And if that's not going to work for me, and this is where I break it down in my work and sort of piece it out a bit more, am I going into a high tone freeze state, which is where the body is basically vibrating and the muscle tone is really high? There's a lot of tension, but no movement. Am I going to go into a low tone freeze state where the body gets really floppy, the muscle tone is floppy, pelvic tone is floppy, digestive tone is floppy? Or am I going to go into a shutdown collapse? And so this idea of a ladder, and I've kind of broken apart Stephen Porges and Deb Dana's idea of a ladder for some more somatic purposes, where we can start to look into a person's body and a person's system and see how the nervous system is understanding the human to be safe or not safe, the soma, and then being stuck or being driven through these adaptive survival states, also known as trauma states or trauma responses.
Yeah, so that's super, super helpful to delineate that difference and um, connecting between what stress is, what trauma is, the different states of the nervous system, the brain, body connection in terms of the nervous system. So tell us now how, I think it was in the book Burnout where they talked about stress isn't the problem, but getting stuck is. And I think what they're talking about in that is a nervous system that is stuck from trauma or chronic stress and isn't as resilient in being able to move through those different states, which we all want to be able to do. We want to be able to be in fight or flight, and then we want to be able to be resilient. So tell us how that then contributes. So to um, I know your specialization in terms of, or one of the areas of many areas that you're specialized in is around anxiety and depression. And oh, we often don't connect the dots. We think of anxiety and depression, and people are diagnosed with that as a mental illness. Um, how do you view anxiety and depression? And what has that got to do with the nervous system? Because we often don't connect those things.
Right. It seems to be free floating. So I'm going to pull us so far back right now.
Okay.
I'm going to pull us all the way back to our earliest ancestors, all the way back in our phylogenetic history that's stored in our DNA today. The gift of our ancestors really is fight, flight, and freeze. Our ancestors were the ones who ran away. Our ancestors were the one who had to stand and fight, and our ancestors were the one who went and hid and were quiet and shut down. That's now encoded into our bodies and acted out through our nervous system. This is really the gift, are these survival adaptations that then get stuck and are perceived as trauma. Now, if we kind of pull up into being a modern human, and even not so modern, even with our ancestors then, we sort of have three levels of language from human or somatic existence. And somatic, like even to break that word apart, fundamentally soma or somatic means of the body, like in the Latin,
Mhm.
that's the baseline. But how I understand it and work with it in the world of somatics, especially emotional somatics, embodied emotions, is that it's a human or a person in a life forward process all the time, in a life forward process. So just to sort of delineate that word just a tiny bit too, to break it apart for folks. Now, we have three sort of sets of language that we learn ourselves in the world through. Our first language is sensation. We are hungry, we're tired, we're cold, we're hot, we're connected, or we're not hot. This is all interoceptive inside of the body for the most part, as well as, our skin. It's so fiber and nerve rich. It tells us a lot about our environment, if we're safe or not. That sensation is what we have learned to understand the world to be from the moment that we're born. We then build emotions out of that, emotional needs out of that, whether we're hungry, tired, connected, or not connected. And those emotions are like signposts for these felt sensations in the body to be met. It's really sort of basic beginner life stuff, but it gets complicated as we grow up and get complicated. The last language that we really develop is our mind and thought and speaking and speech. But our minds are so big that they've decided that they're the most important thing about us.
Mhm. And that's so
because
true.
our because our mind is
Yeah.
the power of language and internal thought, it decides to tell us that it's the most important thing
Mhm.
because it can, not because it is. So we've built our whole world with this concept of mind. But what's happened with the dominance of mind or thought or this concept of mindset is that we've become very, very distracted, discluded, and really divorced from our emotional state, and most importantly, from our sensation state. So in the past number of decades, probably, well, no, like maybe it's been about 30 or 40 years now, people have become way more curious about emotions. Like, what are emotions? But what happens is we think about an emotion and then to me, it always looks like we put it on a cutting board and we cut it up and try to nuance it, right? Like, well, is this anger or
Mm.
disappointment or irritation? Is
Right.
this fear? Is this anxiety? Is this
Mhm.
and so what we've done is we're stuck in our head thinking about our emotions rather than feeling our feelings.
Mhm.
So now there's been a lot of work that we're all standing on top of in the helping professions, right? Standing on top of the idea of understanding emotions and where they come from and how the brain produces them. But somatics is reintroducing us into the sensation of the emotion. So all of our emotions that then turn into thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs are based off of a felt sense in this nerve dense, rich environment of our body. Constriction, fluttering, bubbles, tension, heat, cold. But we've kind of lack a little interoception nowadays. We're really stuck looking outside of ourselves all the time on phones and computers. And we've become a little bit disconnected from the sensations in the body. So, in a somatic perspective, we're really, really guiding folks, if it's available for them, back into some really early perception patterns. Interoception being only one of them, but a pretty important one. What do I notice happening inside of my body right now in this moment? Basic interoception is I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I have to use the bathroom. I'm full, I'm awake, I'm connected, I'm more nuanced interoception might be like when I have anxiety, my chest feels tight. When I'm scared, I feel it in my gut. I've got knowing. So we're guiding people back into interoception. There's other perceptions too that I won't belabor today, like exteroception, proprioception, nociception, neuroception, all different ways that we sort of understand the world from the level of the body. But this is the big one that we're getting to, especially when it comes to things like anxiety and or depression. So in my work, we're looking at anxiety and depression as being two sides of the same coin. They're really a coexisting experience within the nervous system. Anxiety is a sympathetic nervous system charge, which is that high tone freeze, fight, flight state. That's what we call anxiety, are those sensations and impulses within the body, which is to adrenalize, cortisolize, get up, get going, and run away with a lot of muscle tension and power behind it. Depression is sort of subcortical in a way. It's kind of low tone free, shut down, collapse. That's when the body needs to go still. That's when we lie down on our couch and we can't get up. Sometimes there's a real lack of emotion or emotional numbness. Other times, emotions associated with it might be collapse, hopelessness, sadness, grief, listlessness, confusion. So we're looking at, if I had this picture of a ladder to show you, this ladder of safe and social being at the top and collapse, shutdown being at the bottom. Anxiety is in that first few rungs of the ladder, sympathetic nervous system charge. That's like get up and go. And below that is a deep parasympathetic, or in polyvagal terms, dorsal vagal, which some folks might be familiar with, which is really, really low down this ladder, low tone. So, what we're looking at is we're not very interested in people's thoughts or perceptions of anxiety or depression. We're not very concerned with the nuances of a story. That's all well and fine. I mean, we all have our experiences, but especially in body-based approaches, which is what I do, psychology would be top down. Tell me about your family of origin. What happened? What do you think about it? What are your feelings? Can we sort of reconstruct how that might have looked for you? Body-based approaches, somatic approaches from the bottom up. We want to know how bodies are holding, storing, or are stuck in these adaptations or trauma responses. And then we want to know how the body wants to get out, because it does, and it knows how, given the right opportunity. And then we're curious about how emotions want to help us understand the needs of the body. And then the last thing that we're really curious about is what a person thinks about it.
So it's kind of doing a reverse from what many people, I think, do, in the sense of when they're feeling anxious, feeling depressed, feeling, is they go and try and kind of talk it out. But I know, both from what you're sharing and also just, even what the research is saying as well, about that bottom up approach, like that, dealing with the body. So I think that's so important, because I think it from my understanding, when we then bring the nervous system back into it, which I'm going to get you to connect the dot back to, okay, well, where does now the nervous system fit into this? Like how, or regulating the nervous system, because we have that ability to both observe and be aware of and then regulate. So how does that regulating the nervous system, how does that then impact these common experiences that so many people are experiencing that would be labeled as, say, anxiety, depression, or chronic illness, or sleep issues, or any of these things that are symptoms of something? So, how does the nervous system regulation then impact what so many folks are experiencing?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Let's sort of reflect on or imagine or think about a person, whether it's ourselves or somebody else that we know, maybe someone who self-reports that they have anxiety. I am an anxious person. I have anxiety. I have clinical anxiety. My doctor's told me that. I've worked with psychologists, something like that. And then we sort of learn a little bit about their life. Maybe they've lived in a job where there's just unrelenting pressure all the time. And in the modern world, which one of us has not had that?
Mhm.
Consistent,
Yeah.
unrelenting pressure of work, right? And or we could even flesh that out a little bit into like even social structures too. Like think about some kids out there today who are not safe in the world. They don't have safe access to water. They don't have safe access to housing or clothing, right? That is distress on the body through the environment. The body only has so many ways that it can actually respond to this type of distress. It's going to run away, it's going to fight, it's going to shut down. So you have someone who they can't fight and they can't shut down, and they generally have a pretty good family life and they have a good partner. Maybe they went through a divorce. Maybe their own parents were divorced. God, those bills are really piling up. Have you heard about what's happening in Gaza? That's a lot of distress in our system. The nervous system, because it's so ancient, inbuilt, and successful in our body, is turned on and says, "This doesn't feel safe. I'm going to rev up through this information from the nervous system to the brain. I'm going to rev up some adrenaline out of our kidney adrenal system." Oh, we have to go to work today? Okay, I'm going to sit up. I'm going to rev up. I'm going to hit that adrenaline. We're going to buzz that through the system. Oh, there's my cortisol. Yeah, don't turn that off. I got to keep that going all day long. And now here's a person who's like, I'm always stuck in anxiety. I'm always stuck in this buzz, this hum, this hypervigilant state. I can't sleep now because
Mhm.
their cortisol clock is flipped all over the place, right? Or
Mhm.
now I can't digest my food very well.
Yeah.
I've even read the memes of like, am I looking at my bank statement or am I being chased by a tiger? I can't. Can someone tell my nervous system the difference, right?
Right.
Our
Yeah.
nervous systems don't know the difference depending on that level of distress.
Hmm.
Our nervous system does not know the difference between those two situations. It just knows how to survive. That's why it's so successful. But what happens for us as embodied humans in 2025 is that we push down the feelings in our body, we brace our body and hold it tight just to get through that next 8 hours of work. And then when we get home, we can't digest our food anymore because sympathetic adrenaline cortisol driven states turns off the digestive system. The nervous system takes information, sends it rapidly to the brain and says, like, we don't have time to digest food. We simply don't have the energy for that. We just have to keep going to try to get rid of all this adrenaline and cortisol in the system. And now we have gut shutdown. And or we have a gut that's running really fast. And now we have diarrhea or IBS. There's so much information in the lining of the gut. 83% of the vagus nerve fibers are in the lining of the gut, sending that information to the brain. So when people are talking about anxiety, this is how it shows up for them. It's an over adrenalized, sympathetically driven nervous system. But we want to just live our lives. So we push it down and we get really tight and we let our body hold all of this stuff. And then we go somewhere, maybe to a psychologist, to think about it. Our nervous system doesn't care what our brain has to say about it. Our nervous system says
Yeah.
we have to discharge this stress in some way. I go ahead and think, brain. So the nervous system looks up and it's like, oh, yeah, good thinking anyway. Or,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll take that mindfulness under consideration. Nice idea. Okay, kidney adrenal glands, rev up. It's so
Yeah.
good at what it does. It's so efficient and it's quite primal. It's quite primitive in a way in our complex world. So another thing that happens when we go and talk about this type of stuff, like, and talking is really important. I don't want to sound like I'm taking it away from. I have a lot of psychologist friends. I love them. They're great. But what happens, and we know this neurobiologically, is that when we pull up into our brain, into our big human frontal cortex right here in the front of our head, and we want to talk about things, it's a strategy, an unconscious and or conscious strategy to cut off access to our midbrain, the limbic emotional system, so we don't have to feel our feelings. Constantly talking about it and thinking about it actually numbs the emotional state of it, and the somatic state gets kind of lost. But what the nervous system is trying to do is resolve in a eustress type of way that flight response, that fight response, or that freeze response. And you know how it does that? Through movement.
Through movement.
We are bodies that need to move. And I'm not talking about running marathons or like doing some high intensity interval training, or, I mean, that could be really good for people, boxing, that kind of thing. Our body has a really innate way to know how to move through these different states to come back into something that's more rested and coherent, which is often called regulation or feeling regulated, given the opportunity. But it looks so weird and so odd to such inhibited, socialized modern humans that we don't even know how to do it anymore. We don't know what we're looking at when we see it happen. We want to think about it. But yeah, it's really through movement. That's how our lymphatic system helps to metabolize and excrete, cortisol.
I just have to share this story that relates to that before I ask my next question. I was just interviewing a couple for another in this series. And I was interviewing them about the focus of it was how do you know, or what does it mean to be in a soul nourishing relationship? And yeah, it was actually a really fabulous discussion. But what was so great, what I loved about it, it was still very grounded and very practical and very much about, okay, what they do when they're in conflict, when they're have tension. So also in this language, when you're in conflict and you're in that situation, right? Your nervous system is, of course, impacted. So, what they do, what they have found has been super helpful in those situations when they have conflict in their relationship and they need to talk things through, and they do it on a walk. So they are moving their body.
Brilliant.
Isn't that amazing?
It
So
is. And
just
it's bilateral movement as well without direct eye contact.
and
There's a
that's
lot of
exact.
reasons why that would be so good somatically and so
Now,
helpful.
yeah, so that's just an example. They intuitively there was something intuitively in them that knew when we're in this conflict and we're in this fight or flight but we need to talk this out, and we're going to do it when we walk. And they even said it's helpful that we're not actually looking at each other.
That's
And
it.
that they so I just wanted to share how I
I
thought that
love
was fantastic. They were actually talking about maybe they're going to write a book about this, and I'm like, oh, I think
do,
this would be
do,
fantastic.
I love that. Do you want me to give you a somatic breakdown of why that would work?
Yeah, so I think that would be helpful for everybody.
So
All
in that
yeah.
situation, here's like a practical way that this is how this lens looks at it. So conflict or fight is fight response in the nervous system. It's the nervous system now, and fight response, everyone's afraid of it because we've confused it with violence, because we've seen so much violence in our personal lives or in the world at large. So now we think fight or fight response is a violence. It's not. It doesn't have to be. It's often in response to violence or perception of harm. Fight response usually arises for people when it's a boundary violation, when there's a perception, an embodied perception of a boundary violation. I'm not being respected. I don't know my own boundaries. I don't know what boundaries are. Someone doesn't respect my boundaries in a whole bunch of different ways. So fight response, that one rung on the ladder, comes into action for people to begin to hold boundaries and clarify their point of view or how they're feeling in their body. So when you get mad, you can have the best arguments. It's so adrenalized, it clears your mind. But when it's unattenuated or stuck, it feels like anger, distress again, argument, that kind of thing, when it's really about rebuilding boundary state. So here's a couple who's like, you know what? We're both in like a little bit of an adrenalized fight state. This is a request of the body to move. Anxiety, by the way, is the body requesting mobilization. So they've decided to mobilize their bodies in fight response because that's what the adrenaline and the cortisol is actually trying to do, is to move the bodies. Bilateral movement, meaning one leg this way, one leg that way, arm swinging, maybe finding coherence or rhythm in the system starts to soothe the nervous system, starts to soothe the brainstem and the cerebellum. I can move. I'm in rhythm. We're inherently rhythmic creatures. We're born with a heartbeat. When we can start to sense rhythm, particularly through walking, that's a down regulation, oftentimes for a distressed or parasympathetic or a sympathetically driven nervous system. Rhythm with another person builds co-regulation. Heartbeats are probably starting to syncopate. Your heart has its own nervous system in and of itself. And then the lack of direct eye contact is actually really important because our vagus nerve, I haven't talked a whole bunch about it, but the vagus nerve, the vagus pathway, it influences everything in our body. It influences the muscles of our eyes. It influences the muscles of our ears, our lips, our tongue, our laryngeal diaphragm, our throat. It touches every organ. I could go on and on about it. But one of the ways that the vagus nerve sends messages back to the brain that I'm not safe, particularly in an aroused state, is direct eye contact. So direct eye contact is a real perception of threat for somebody who is in a distressed or sympathetically driven nervous system state. You know how you maybe told your kids, or you were told as a kid, never stare at a dog? Never make
Right?
direct eye contact and stare at
Right.
a dog you don't know because it might attack you, right?
Hmm.
We're not that different.
Hmm.
We're not. Direct eye contact for people in a distress state is overwhelming. They'll either shut down or they'll get really mad or they'll have to look away. So we'll see that a lot in neurodivergent population as well. It's overwhelming and overstimulating to have direct eye contact. That vagus nerve starts going, this person's going to attack us. So when you have a couple who's maybe arguing or in a little bit of like a tiff or something or a big fight, direct eye
Yeah.
contact is a really bad idea. It's too much. It's too overwhelming for a system that's like stuck in a drive, in a survival drive. So going for a walk, talking it out, chef's kiss somatically
Oh,
for them.
that I love that. And here we are. This is like about connecting the dots. And so aren't we even connecting the dots? So here from a talking about a soulful relationship, which is part of my work is about blending science and soul more from the energy of our becoming, the inner impulse in us to heal, to come back into homeostasis and health,
Yep.
and then to move forward in cultivating a deeper sense of authentic happiness through presence, purpose, and a deeper sense of inner peace. So all of these things connect. So before I get you to share some practical tips around, which is, you've already done that, but more practical tips about how we can uh, create that safety through our body. I just want to, since a lot, like I say, a lot of my focus is around science and soul as it relates to connecting all these dots. How does, and I believe and I think Gabor Mate's work around being authentic and how he links authenticity, which is being true to ourselves, having those boundaries, having the wisdom of our emotions when this is a no, or when we're meant to use our voice, or when we're not, supposed to avoid anger or conflict. And he makes those linkages between our true self and authenticity, and which to me is the energy of the soul. And when we're not living in alignment, and then he talks about how that manifests as addictions and chronic illness, and then back again into what we've been talking about, nervous system dysregulation, which is then part of that whole equation. So, have you found that to be true in all the people that you've worked with and all the work you've done around the body and somatics and nervous system, that when people aren't living their truth, whatever that might be, like, oh, examples might be, well, my family really thinks I should be going off to university and getting a PhD in this, but my soul has other ideas for me that's not right for me, and yet I'm doing it. Or I am doing this other thing to appease my spouse when really deep down inside, that's a compromise that maybe my soul is rebelling against, saying, that's how do you see that from your experience and wisdom links in with nervous system and health and healing? I know
Yeah,
you could write a
no, that's
book about it, I
great.
know,
We both
but
could.
just
We'll
just to
just do, we'll just like
connect all.
co-author.
I know we'll
What is,
integrate. We will. This is so. I love talking to people that connect these
like,
dots in a way that is so helpful, empowering for people.
it is such a good question and it's such an important conversation to have because when people are stuck in trauma, and trauma on an individual level, trauma on a family level, trauma on a collective social level, a
Yeah.
climate level, a global level. These are
Yeah.
tricky times we're all living in right now.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of anxiety out there because it's people are asking to mobilize, you know.
Let's just
When we're,
name it. Yes.
yeah, like
There is collective global,
calamity,
like it was
threat.
COVID.
Yep.
That was an external, well, external was a virus, a physical thing.
Yeah.
But now we're back in collective
Yep.
anxiety, threat.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, back to you. And back to living in alignment and
Isn't that so
yeah,
fiery feeling though? Like it's so alive in our
yeah,
systems when we're able to name it and talk about it and connect on it. It's so alive.
yeah,
There's such a collective. So when people come to me right now and they're like, I have anxiety, I'm like, yeah, I bet you do. It'd be
yeah.
weird if you didn't, if you're paying attention, you probably do. But when we're talking about like authenticity and like living on
Yeah.
a spiritual soul level, it's really hard to live there when you're not safe.
Mhm.
When we have systems that are stuck in trauma responses or survival adaptations, it doesn't feel safe to be in connection with other people. Other people don't look safe. It's a brain operation thing where we start to see other people as others and us as us, and these two things are different. And that's really far away from living in an embodied spiritual perspective. Yeah. I mean, I think we can both
100%.
agree on that, right? So for
Yeah.
my work, like when I don't talk about like regulation a whole bunch, I do because it carries water. People under really understand what that means. You know, Deb Dana, Steve Porgens's word for this is like safe and social. Gabor's talking about authenticity. Peter Levine is talking about like regulation. My word for it really is embodied presence.
Mm,
When we can have small
nice.
moments of not being stuck in like
Mm,
wanting to run away, fight, shut down, and hide, like just little tiny like breaths of air, we're titrating safety into our nervous system through somatics. That's when a person really gets to connect with rest, rest that
mm,
helps cellular turnover and coherence in our different body systems. It reflects into creativity and curiosity about the world around us, and it facilitates connection to others because we are connected to ourselves. And then that's when we can really start to see some very, very spontaneous understanding and relationship back to the earth, back to the earth body, which we are. We're never separated from it. We just feel separated from it. And that's when some folks also get to really connect in with something that just feels higher and bigger than they are. You know, regardless of what that is. I have no comment on what that might actually be for each human, right? Because it's safe to do so. And because we even have the brain capacity. Now our whole brain is turned on. Our heart is turned on. It feels safe. Our gut can just
mhm.
go back to work and we can connect with another person. That's authenticity.
I
Curiosity, compassion, energy, connection,
vitality,
vitality,
being
rest when you
and
need to rest, awake when you need to be awake,
intuition and
intuition, totally.
synchronicities.
Yep.
I love that you just kind of brought it back to that. Like it's so interesting. I just was on a call earlier today with someone, a young gentleman who reached out because he felt his soul was rebelling. And as we started talking, um, it goes back to my belief, which is consistent with your belief, was he was feeling a lot of anxiety and he wasn't sleeping and he was going for sleep studies. And he was thinking, well, if I just, figure out the soul thing. And I said, well, my belief and my work is really you starting with that, what you just called embodied presence.
Mhm.
Like first it is your body and you're having these. So before we go into what is your higher, what is your calling, or for that truly to be revealed, it needs to be from a place of embodied, like you call it. I love how you call that embodied presence
Yeah.
and through a safe nervous system. And the symptoms of the sleep and the anxiety, those are all symptoms. So we start there. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of my big I guess we all have our pet peeves. My pet peeve would be what is the spiritual bypassing of completely like dysregulated and not embodied presence and
Yep.
any of that, and yet there's this spiritual, wanting to bypass the stuff, the human stuff that lives in
Yeah.
our body, our emotions, that lives in our body, lives in our brain, lives in our that's the place to start. If
It's
we
wild
tr
to
yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah,
You
no,
just got
I
me
know
really excited again.
we always get excited about these things. Yeah.
Like that is the truth. Like there is so much spiritual bypass about being in a body, right? And I think we've even talked about it before. I've got all sorts of like historical theories on, a lot of Eastern mysticism, mythology coming into our cognition in the West, really in the early 1900s, but in the 60s and 70s for sure. Post World Wars, during Korean War, Vietnam War, right? That's when like society was really shifting and changing here in the West. And a lot of like Eastern philosophical modalities got floated in and became somewhat embedded, especially in wellness and spiritual spaces. Yeah. A lot of those, if we can have a historical view on them, a lot of those thought processes that were interpreted through traumatized Western bodies really lean on like we're just in a meat suit, we're a spirit riding around in a human. When we die, or we're always trying to connect with something higher up and out. And it makes sense historically. It probably felt real safe to be in a body as someone who lived through World War I and World War II, or whose parents did, right? Or the Great Depression, or the Dust Bowl, that kind of thing. So you can see that spiritual bypassing has like a historical imprint towards it. But now, when we're talking about embodied presence, regulation, authenticity, whatever word we want to use for that, the invitation of like, what's coming in through here? This is the miracle.
Yeah,
Like,
this
this,
yes,
this
that is
is the
all
spirit.
worth.
This
We
is
are
it. We're a
yes.
tapestry. The soul is a tapestry through the eyes and the skin and the nervous system
Yes.
and the magic of our emotions and our feelings and all of those incredible things. Like
Yes. Yeah.
as within, as above, so below, but as without, also within.
Mhm.
It's the same. So we start to actually invite back like divinity through the cell wall structure.
Yes, to the little mitochondria that
In our hearts,
that
yes,
produce our ATP, our energy,
through our
that
mothers.
we can then bring forth into the world through our biology, our
Mind
the
blowing.
what you said, the brain all over the body.
Yeah,
We can bring it forth when we start with a place of embodied
yeah.
presence.
The miracle is
Oh,
here all the
we're
time, right?
I know we just have to think about our little ATPs
Yeah,
and our mitochondria and
yeah.
how our nervous system is
And
it's
feeling
amazing
safe. I
and
love the client that you
feeling
were
safe.
working with. Oh, sorry, the client who was like, I
Yeah.
like my soul's rebelling. Like I would get so curious about that. I'd be like, what are you rebelling against? And is it okay? Is it okay to have a soul in rebellion right now? Like, yeah, things aren't fair. Things are scary. Things don't feel quite just or equitable, right? I can see how that would be an experience. I love the language of that too. As opposed to like a spiritual bypassing of wanting to shut that down, be like, oh no, 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 we can never be in rebellion.
Oh,
We can never
oh,
be, oh no, no, we can't. We have to just be calm and zen. And that's the other like misconception often of like a regulation, emotional regulation, is that a person's always like, no, 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 no. That's available when it's helpful. That's a sign of regulation, that you can get there if it is helpful for you, but you're not stuck there either. You're an
right.
engaged person with your feet on the earth with other people.
Yes, we're not stuck there. I think that's what we're building, that elasticity, that resilience, that flow, that in and out of states. We need all of them. We need every state. They're all needed, but we don't want to be stuck.
They're good.
And
Fight
and
response, flight
so
response. They're good.
we it helped us survive. So with that, um, and as we're kind of the final piece of this amazing discussion, because I know you and I could talk about this for hours. Um, Tell us about practices that
Right.
might, you've already talked, it's so beautifully described about a walk and talk and moving the body, how that was then actually applied in relation to a couple in conflict. And you beautifully described, okay, well, you know why? What's
Yeah.
actually going on there? You connected a bunch of dots. So, what other suggestions might you have for us around a place to really start with that embodied presence as
Sure.
most helpful practices?
So let's start with, I'll talk about one or two and then we'll do kind of like a final one just so people can feel it in their bodies. I want to sort of start with this idea of people who are in depression or who are at that bottom of the ladder. That is the hardest place to live. When somebody is in a depression, a depressed state, clinical depression, shutdown, they are working harder than anybody else. It takes so much life force suppression to be down. So to have a lot of grace and space for folks who are in depression, they're not lazy, they're not stuck. In
Mhm.
fact, they going out for a walk feels insurmountable. Brushing your teeth, taking a shower can just be too much energy. We don't
Mhm.
have enough in depressed states because we're working so hard at just being laying down. So with that in mind, and people watching this might want to imagine or think about someone, maybe it was themselves, when they were actually down,
Mhm.
horizontal on the couch in bed, or a quality, a part of them was just down, to take a moment here and just feel your connection to whatever you're sitting on or your feet on the earth. Or you might even imagine or remember what it felt like to be what I call horizontal with the earth. And then take some time to check in with that connection, either the chair or through your feet, and make friends with moments when your body needs to have you shut down. That the earth is always there supporting you in those deepest, darkest times. You're never alone. The earth is
Mhm.
always supporting you. So to feel the earth or connect with the earth underneath us can be a helpful way for people to feel supported in shutdown response. They're not bad, they're not lazy. Maybe they're recharging a bit. Maybe the earth can charge those mitochondria, those ATP,
Mhm.
right? Being horizontal helps your cerebral spinal fluid kind of wash your brain too. It's just trying to reset. So let's move up just a little bit as you're feeling the chair underneath you and you're feeling your feet on the ground. And I want you to get a sense of maybe a time when you were in fight response, conflict, or you felt like your boundaries weren't respected, or you didn't even understand boundaries. And as you feel the chair and the earth support, you give your shoulders a little squeeze, maybe squeeze your glutes, maybe squeeze your thighs, maybe clench your toes. Give your body just a little bit of this squeeze. Don't let anything hurt. Nothing should hurt. We've all learned through enough pain. Give it a little squeeze and notice how powerful you are. You might even get a bit of a vibration or a shake in your squeeze. If you're not breathing, take a couple of comfortable breaths and let your body kind of power up. You might even have fists or something. And then nice and slow, notice how your body can let go. Does it let go in your shoulders? Does it let go in your glutes first? Oh, your shoulders might still be holding. Take some time to let armpits even open up a bit. Oh, what about jaw? What about your eyes? And then when you think you're done, when your brain says, oh, I'm done, take one or two more breaths because your body might be like, oh, yeah, no, wait, there's even a little bit more to let go of here if I stay with it. And this is the magic of somatics, is that we start to slow things down because slow is very data rich. We start to learn what we've been skipping over. And then we're with that. So there's a little bit of a fight response boundary, going in, going out. And then what about flight response? I got to run away. I got to get out of this place. Really slowly just start tapping your feet with a little rhythm. Notice if that movement goes all the way up your body, like I can even see your head moving, or does it feel like it's just in the feet? We just get curious. And then if you want, you speed it up a little bit. You just let your feet kind of tap, tap, tap. You might hear the sounds. Notice if your breathing changes, if your respiratory diaphragm does something. Notice if your heart rate goes up a little bit. Let your shoulders wobble. And then slow that down. Don't stop abruptly, just try to slow it down. Hear the rhythm again. Nice. And then as slow as you can, you just let your feet come into stillness. And then you feel the chair underneath you again. Look at that. That supportive chair never left you. Didn't judge you. Didn't go away. You're still supported. And then for that embodied presence or safe and social, what would it feel like just to begin to look around your environment wherever you are? You might look up and you might look down and you might look far away and you might look close by. And as you're moving, you might even let your neck feel kind of soft and a little bit squishy. And if there's something in your space or in your room that you like to look at, would it be nice to let your eyes just rest for a breath or two on something that's beautiful to look at? And let your brain take in beauty, creativity. Maybe it's a photo of someone you love. Yeah, and then you might wobble your body just a little bit if that felt tight. And here we are now back in connection.
Mm, thank you. That was so beautiful to
That's okay.
actually experience what you've been so powerfully sharing with us. That was really beautiful. So, as we're just wrapping up our conversation today, is there any final things that you would like to share that either I didn't ask or that just any final thought or wisdom that you'd like to share before we
Yeah.
wrap up for today?
I'm feeling so regulated right now that my mind isn't racing through a million things that we could talk about.
Mm,
Unlike earlier at the beginning when I felt a little nervous and so I had more
yeah.
adrenaline that seems to have like calmed in my own system. I can feel that. I really want to thank you for creating these points of connection. This really is the medicine out of all of the separation and loneliness I think people are feeling. And, maybe if there was just one parting thing that I'd leave people with who are watching, my invitation, and sometimes people want to throw this out the window when I say it, but I will just drop it into the field is that your body is never working against you. It really isn't. It's really trying to do something. Sometimes it got stuck, or there was a pattern that was helpful once, and now it kind of has to find some help to find its way out. But our bodies are never working against us. They're really trying to work for us. So just
That
for that
is
consideration.
that is such a powerful way just to wrap up our conversation. Like I had when you said that about a reminder that our bodies are always working for us, are always, it gave me goosebumps. So that is a deep truth. And I think that's such a beautiful way to leave this. And so, Stacey, for people to find you or to learn more about you and your work, it would be through your website,
Yeah.
Mindful Somatic Wellness. Is that the best way to for people if they want to reach out or learn more about your work? Yes?
Yeah, that's the best way.
Yeah.
Come find me
Okay.
at Mindful Somatic Wellness. I'm running a retreat in May all about the heart, tending to our hearts.
Oh,
I'm running a workshop tomorrow about
oh,
hands and touch and nervous system regulation through self-touch practices. And I've always got
oh,
like I've always got a bunch of cool things on the go, and I'm always
oh,
open to a conversation. So you can find me on social media.
oh. I love it. Well, but just as you're talking about that, my mind is about touch, and then I'm thinking about self-compassion and self-compassion. I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, we're gonna have to have another discussion another day with to carry on this amazing conversation. So, Stacey, thank you
Thank you.
truly for being here, sharing your beautiful soul, your wisdom, your insight, your sharing your embodied presence with
Mm.
us. It was truly meaningful. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone else for joining us today. Take good
Yeah.
care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.